1940s. And the common people really don't have any idea what a telescope is, but they are fascinated with the possibility of being able to see what's going on other planets. And so they write these, some of them completely insane letters, fascinatingly, brilliantly insane letters. There's a series of letters from a woman who's surely psychotic that are just absolute genius. And similarly, there's a letter from a young man who wants to go to Mars at any cost. Like, he knows he may not come back. It doesn't matter. He wants to be the first guy there. And then there's a long letter that I love that I've made some recordings from about a man just raving that there's no such thing as gravity. And the astronomers are just lying. They're just a bunch of lying astronomers making up this. No one can prove that there's gravity. This is ridiculous. It's just, it's fabulous. I love it.
Does he have an alternative explanation for the way things are?
See, I think that's a beautiful problem, because we have this idea that if you if you say that something is wrong, then it's on you to show what is correct. But that's not true. That's not, there's no, those two things don't go together, right? Like, you guys are just straight up lying about gravity, and I don't have to tell you what is actually going on. I'm just telling you this gravity thing is bullshit, which, you know, is probably going to turn out to be true.
Yeah.
Right. This is the problem.
But it almost seems like whatever we think is true and real, given enough time, will be proven to be wrong. That seems to be kind of the way it goes from the perspective of the whatever 53 years I've been here. You know, what kind of bits I've picked up from history, you know, and just experience leads me to believe that people don't ever know anything. I mean, it's kind of like you know, we know what we're directly experiencing, and you know, we can make some predictions and they might come true a lot of the time, but it's all very imprecise as far as I can tell. Yeah.
I mean, I would argue that the concept of knowledge as we hold it today as moderns is completely bullshit. There's no possibility of that shit being true. It's just a completely wrong fucking minded way to think. There's things we can have simple knowledge about, like this will probably be here in a minute. But the idea that we know like what stuff is or what's going on, and that we know that kind of explicitly and in a single valued way, complete fucking nonsense. And probably prior to maybe, I don't know, 300-400 years ago, there were zero humans thinking this way. It's like, it's a weird product of what? Science, features of science, features of religion, materialist philosophy, reductionist philosophy. Things are mechanical, they're one value. We can know with certainty certain things, right? I mean, the idea of certainty itself has a fairly narrow, useful scope, but it has somehow exploded all the way across the spectrum of knowledge so that you're not certain you don't know. Or rather, yeah, there's this really terrifying single valued idea. And there's a complex array, excuse me, of sort of implementations of this problem. But yeah, what we think of as knowledge, I think we're very confused generally. It's like a lot of it, I'm actually committing the problem that I'm talking about. So
Well, yeah.
I'm saying knowledge means one thing. It's a one, and that thing's wrong.
Hmm.
So it's so tempting that it's hard to escape. Go ahead.
Well, it's the cultural water that we've been swimming in, isn't it? This abstraction, this head thing. For me, my understanding is that we've just gone so far into our heads and now beyond it, through our heads out into this kind of virtual space that, I mean, that to me is the root of the problem. It's the disconnect from the body and the heart, and therefore the living world. We're interfacing with the world through ideas instead of direct experience, mostly. Most of us mostly seem to be doing that. And I think we've been on this kind of trajectory for a while now. And what we're experiencing right now, to me, looks like it just crashing and starting to fall apart. And I feel like, some of these kind of as it's cracking, some of this ancient stuff, and we'll probably, no doubt, get onto Ammon at some point. But what that signal that comes through what he's doing for me it's like this whole edifice of our culture has cracked so deeply down to its roots, which seem to be, certainly in the West, I'm talking about the West, obviously. Um, ancient Greece is the foundation for the West. And I feel like what's happened is the cracks have gone right down to the very foundation. And suddenly this Western cultural energy is bursting out like lava or something, and it's coming out in this weird kind of way. And it's quite chaotic, but I'm getting such a sense. I mean, that's what to switch me on when I heard him speaking. You know, it wasn't really the content so much. It was just this energy and this recognition of this is something ancient. I'm actually getting a pipeline to ancient culture, and it's fascinating because it seems to speak to a time when the people had a balance between body, heart, and mind, and they kind of brought it all together into some incredible cultural moment that's lasted 2000 years or more, and and it makes me think of that idea that Terence McKenna had about the archaic revival. Like we've kind of come back, and it goes with the whole spiral dynamics thing of, that I don't know how much you know about that, but when you get to that second tier, you're revisiting the first stages of human development, but the next go round.
The
So
next
like
register.
all those things seem to be coming together um, in a fascinating way for me. And I suppose, I'm not really one for hope anymore. I think hope is a kind of false investment, but I'm just seeing some kind of possibility for reconnection to what to me is real and more balanced through all of this. I mean, I may not even see it in my lifetime, but I'm seeing the beginning of it. This kind of this energy represents to me the beginnings of some kind of breakthrough. If we survive what's coming next, then I can see a sort of another Greece, whatever the new version of that is, eventually from all of this, if we make it. And that's kind of exciting. Yeah.
a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
So I want to go back for a moment to what I was attempting to communicate about knowledge. And rather than adopt what I think, this is one of the mistakes that I think we moderns make. That's a terrifying mistake, actually. Is that when we're concerned about a term, we go to the dictionary or we go to what we think the common definition or meaning of the term is, when that's actually not how language is supposed to work. Language is supposed to work by us deciding on purpose what our purposes are and how we are trying to see, and then molding the language together so that it is consonant with our intent in our conversation, right? And I think that that's the difference. Us moderns are subject to language. And one of the things that Ammon is aware of, even though he doesn't talk about it a lot, is that's not how language works. You're not subject to language. Language is your toy. You make it do what you need it to do. And the abstraction that comes into consciousness when we play the game the modern way is terrifying because it's uninhabitable relationally, intellectually, poetically. So I just want to mention that briefly, that what I was yelling at a moment ago was the absence of the human in the concept of knowledge as it's popularly played, when I should have began more intelligently. So just that little correction there.
Well, that, you see, what comes up for me as you're saying that is what Ammon kind of points to, and he refers to it. I mean, he's in love with the Greek language, and part of his love is the fact that it has this capability to do what you've just described, where you can kind of tailor it to whatever you've got going on. It's got this extra dimension. And for me, that just reminds me of poetry, because poetry to me is like the raw material of language. It's kind of the ore from which culture and language is built. And when poems at certain times resonate deeply with people, they have meaning that's contextual, that's about that moment and time. And a word you've heard 1,000 times before can suddenly mean and feel completely different because it's been used in the poem. And I feel like these things are completely related. And what excites me about this idea about the Greek, which makes me want to learn it, even though I'm no scholar, and I wonder even if I would have time to study it enough to get what I'm after with it. But I'd love to find the experience of language that's creative in that way again. Because, of course, language is alive. This is the other thing that he refers to, and we all know it if we look through history. It's constantly evolving. Words do change their meaning, sometimes completely the opposite, or they kind of slowly die, or they almost flatline and get forgotten, and then they get revived later on. And new words are being made all the time. So it is this kind of, even in our culture, that's the case. But I'm fascinated by this extra dimension of language that you just pointed to. This kind of, I mean, how would you describe that sort of further to what you've already said? It's this capacity to kind of create in the moment new language, but everyone who's speaking it would understand. Do you know? I don't know. What do you think? What's your view on what that is, that extra dimension?
Okay, so many things here. There's a certain age, if you watch children, you will discover that between the ages of like 9 and 12, in their peer groups, presuming that they have peer groups and they're not just isolated, they will begin to forge jargon that is specific to their peer groups and allows them to say things that others can't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the inversion of the adults, you know, when they're going to take them, when they act like, should we take the dog, should the DOG go for a WALK, right? Because they don't want the dog to hear the question and freak out and start pissing itself with glee, right? Or, you know, they're spelling words in front of the children who don't yet spell, which is a very interesting, you see how profoundly fascinating that specific ploy is, because nothing is going to be more interesting to that child than what the hell those letter sounds are, and what the adults are trying to hide from the child. Child's going to be highly motivated to figure out that coding right quick, right? So there's a lot of games that go on. Unfortunately, we tend to, the jargoneering of late childhood tends to get lost. We will be unlikely to encounter it again unless we know comedians. Comedians neologize. They will make shit up to make you laugh. They will put two words together that you never thought, and you just like, wow, you know. Neologizing turns out to be crucially important to human linguistic consciousness and play. I do it somewhat regularly, although I'm trying to think if I have any examples in my mind at the moment. I probably don't. I can come up with some, or maybe just do it while we're talking. But you know, languages like German, for example, are particulate in such a way that you constantly can create new words by just mixing the parts together. I don't speak German, but I'm aware of this feature, right? So like if you say Zeitgeist, for example, you mean like spirit of the time or time spirit. Zeitgeber means time giver, Zeitstorer means time taker. So this Zeit thing means time. Now there might be something resembling that in English, I'm not sure. But if we had a cohort that was both playing at being human together and performing missions that were important to us, we would develop private language, right? Cockney in the UK was an example of a coded rhyming language. That's incredible. Think how powerful that is. Why are we not playing games like that?
Well, I mean, you must have equivalents in the States because I mean, Cockney's the one you know because it's probably had the kind of biggest reach internationally. But every part of the country where accents are different have their own language and version to that. You know, when I was a teenager in Manchester, there was a thing called backslang, which was kind of like words were shifted around, like a letter was moved from the front to the back and things like that. And I think every sort of urban center and maybe even in the countryside, I mean, I'm sure because there are phrases and ways of saying stuff in all, you know, England is such a tiny country, but the difference in accents, if you travel like 15, 20 miles, somebody can be speaking in a completely different accent and have a whole set of phrases that are particular to that place. And I guess that's less so now, you know, in my lifetime, I've seen the sort of homogenization of English and also the Americanization of English. So that's probably being diluted a little bit now. But, you know, 2 generations ago, it was alive and kicking, and it's still there. It's what, you know, it waits. Its potential is there all the time, I think. Yeah.
So, yes. Okay. there are forms of slang. Of course, there's like the Urban Dictionary and stuff, right, on the internet. Yeah. But Cockney seems to be a very peculiar thing, and I'm not an expert on it. You've grown up in that place. I only know of it, from across the pond or whatever. But it's very profound because it's a rhyming slang, and it's meant, if I understood it correctly, it was meant originally to be able to talk about the stuff you shouldn't be doing, right? Crime, and so forth. And by the way, I just opened up my notes, right? And the first note that I opened to, presentation, right? This is me neologizing. And the next note after that is I'm walking around the street the other day, and because we're having sort of like a little festival here, there's musicians like every 10 feet, right? Where normally there's maybe one per neighborhood or something.
Mm-hmm.
So much music that music was impossible, right? It was over musicked. So, I do play with neologizing myself, but in order to do that, you have to be in a cohort that neologizes together for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
If we're isolated, we're not, unless we're very linguistically precocious, and I kind of am, right? you're not supposed to say you're a poet. It's like saying I'm a shaman or something, right? But I write poetry.
Yeah.
I'm very aware of it. It's important in my life. So unless you're with a cohort, we're not really likely to do that. But it's crucially important that language serves our purposes and that there's an actual us, like right here with you and me, there's a real us to the degree that we, it's so funny, prioritize, right? Which literally means to make before, right? To make come first, to the degree that we prioritize the us rather than, for example, me becoming fascinated with the sound of my own voice, which is an actual problem that I have to, wrestle with. The playful way in which children make up. So like I knew I was in touch with a young girl for quite some time because I was close with both her and her mother. And she was an unusually minded person. And she would talk about this word that her and her friends used that they made up. I believe that the word was bonnier, but it didn't have a meaning. They would just look at something and one of them would go bonnier and the other one would go like, yeah, bonnier, right? But it didn't have.
Or
It was
perhaps,
just,
Darren, it had a meaning, but it wasn't an intellectual one. It was a
yes,
felt thing, right? It's a
right.
feeling.
It's a way of emphasizing some kind of differentiation from the dead inside bullshit that the adults are constantly practicing together.
Yeah.
Like it's a presentation, right? Every time the adults are speaking, right? It's another presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that I talked about in one of my recent recordings on prisoneering in English, which is just the establishment of these dead inside ideas and proposals, postulates, models of humanity and reality, life and death, and they're just fucking uninhabitable, right?
Yeah.
No wonder the kids are like doing drugs and going crazy and doing crime and being semi-suicidal, if not directly suicidal, right? Testing themselves against death. They don't want to, even back when I was a kid and it wasn't that bad, we had an agreement among me and my friends that if we made it to 35, we would take each other out. Like I just don't let me become like
Don't
those
let me
people.
become one of them.
Yeah,
Right.
and that was in the 70s when things were still pretty
Yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah. I know
Like there
that
was
looks like a golden age now, doesn't it? Looking
exactly
back.
right. And we're
Fuck.
like, please, no, God, like, don't let me do that. I don't want to
Yeah,
live
yeah.
like that,
Yeah.
even for one day. Just
Yeah.
come, if like whoever's still alive, take the other guys out at 35, right?
Mm. Yeah, that's it. I mean, that is it. It's that sense of the fakeness Teenagers, it's interesting. You're talking about kids having their language. My daughter, my youngest daughter was 12 today. So she's been inhabiting and still is to some degree that place that you're describing. And her older sister is 15. And she's very much now in that place where she's just looking at the adults with contempt, like, really starting to see their bullshit and just having no time for it at all. And it's been great for me because I've been noticing this arising in her, and I've been consciously aware of the signal she's sending me whenever I'm just doing some adult bullshit habit thing. And luckily, I've realized that's why there is a natural need to pull away from your parents at that age. But also, what happens or has happened a lot in our culture is the adults are so steeped in their bullshit and their repetitive nature by then that when the kids get to that age, they've just had enough of it. And usually the adults can't see that themselves and so just think the kids are being awful. But luckily, I don't know how, but something in me said, pay attention. She's showing you where you've got stuck, where you've just been in the habit, in the grind of parenthood, and you've started to just spout the dead shit sometimes. So whenever I get that signal now, I really receive it, and go, okay, I'll question what I just said, or I will, whenever I notice it or whenever I can, I'll admit when I've got it wrong or what I just said was bullshit and I think she senses that now and it's an unspoken thing between us. There's a sort of camaraderie between us in a weird way that's a silent one. And I'm realizing the more I practice that and pay attention and use her insight to, recalibrate myself and remind myself to be here in this moment again. And, listen, she's got something to share with me now, and it's really valuable. And the more I notice that and I pay attention to that, I feel like this bond between us gets stronger. And we can have disagreements about things. And she is only 15 and she's got, that arrogance and she doesn't know a lot about being alive and she doesn't understand that a lot of the positions I take are because I've lived for this long. So all of that's in there, but she has something so valuable. And I think that's what teenagers have. They're really holding up the mirror of everything that you've all the habits you've developed over that time from when they were born to now. And they're saying, some of this, maybe most of it is bullshit. Can we have a look at this now? So yeah, interesting.
So much there. I guess it's in some way socially or morally or linguistically dangerous to speak in certain ways about our children. And Ammon is very clearly speaks with great reverence, wonder, awe, and respect about young women, right? He's talking about 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old girls who are trained to hunt men from horseback and kill them with poisoned arrows and are masters of intoxicants and venoms and things. And it's very clear that I'm not saying he's, I don't know how to put it.
I know what you're trying to say.
Right.
There's
You know
no
what I'm trying
right way to put it. It's really difficult. It's so triggering, all of this as well.
Right.
Like it's so, I mean, as I'm saying, I've got two young daughters
Right.
and I'm so open-minded about all kinds of things, almost everything. But there's one place where I'm completely unreasonable, and that's when
Yeah,
it comes to fucking pedophilia. I just want to fucking kill those people. It's the
yeah,
most viscerally repulsive thing to me, and
but
everything
okay,
in my instincts just wants to
absolutely.
kill
The,
it.
the protection of our children, especially
Yeah,
our female children,
yeah, yeah.
not that we don't protect the males similarly, right? Somebody's
Oh,
messing with,
both. I mean, yeah, fuck.
get it. And I absolutely am on the same channel there. But let's
But
talk
also, it's
about,
fascinating to kind of realize that it's also a product of our time, because I'm looking at my 12-year-old is now, she's going through, her body is starting to change. And when you have daughters, you realize they become women so young. I mean, by women, what I mean is they're physically ready to have children so
right,
young.
yeah,
By our cultural standards, it's too young. But
yeah.
I can see how when your lives are short, or when you're in a completely different time, a different culture. When girls became able to have children, they were ready to go, and that would have been
In our cultures, they still marry.
completely built into the culture.
Yeah, I mean, there still exist cultures that marry off children, at least the girl children.
Hmm.
I don't know about the boys. There are cultures, though, that are so different from ours. I'm not going, I mean, it would be too provocative for me to talk about the things that I have learned from studying anthropology. Way too provocative. I'm not going to say anything about it at all.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
What I am going to say is that it's not wrong for us to adore our children or to revere the youth and the beauty of the children without sexualizing it specifically, without making it like an erotic commodity, for example. Um, a couple times in my life, I had the privilege of taking care of uh, either a young girl. I mean, literally, my friend who named her daughter Athena had me take care of her for 6 months while she was working in town. And that was one of the most amazing experiences in my life because Athena, and this is the person Ammon, this is the goddess that Ammon's actually talking about, right? Um, Her mind and her way of being in the world were so superior to anything her mother could table. I mean, her mother's pretty sophisticated, but Athena's mind is sharper than any adult's mind, more incisive, more insightful, devastatingly on the mark, like all the time, right? And playful and explorative and curious. When I would teach her, I taught her pieces of Latin and stuff, and she was so smart. She picked that stuff up right away and applied it to medical language and stuff. Taught her things about the bees. I mean, strangely, this is going to sound ironic, but I taught her to pay really close attention to the bees and how to rescue them when they're on the ground. And she was fascinated by that. I taught her how to draw birds to her hand, and she was ecstatic about that.
yeah. Wow.
And so we had a blast together. There was no sexual aspect to that relationship, but it was an incredibly deep bond.
Mm.
And I let her lead me. I trusted her intellect. Yes, there's things she doesn't know about the world and that's dangerous and stuff like that. And I would point those things out if she started to veer into some direction where I thought like this is not going to go well if she continues in that direction.
Mm.
And a couple of times, parents had me talk to their daughters who were autistic or unusually minded and very imaginative because the child had no adult who could sort of understand where their consciousness is. And
Mm.
these were moments of incredible learning and profound insight for me. So there's a difference between there's sort of two different aspects of this idea that we call pedophilia, right? There's the bad thing that we mean when we use this word, we almost always mean this bad thing, which is adults sexualizing children. But there's this other thing, which is the adoration of the child's developmental moment and prowess and the beauty and the spirit in the child, which maybe we need a different word for or something, but these are not the same thing. And we should never kill this one because it sounds similar to this one, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
You know,
It's
one of
that
the things,
thing. I mean, kill is the word. To me, the thing that I, that I fight with my whole being is that it's a murdering. What happens in those moments when an adult, abuses a child in that way is that they kill them in some way. Because all, so many people that I've known who were abused as children, it breaks them for life. And, people do incredible things to come back from that, but it breaks them in such a fundamental way. It's a kind of murder. And, that's what it feels like to me. And it's also a kind of, I can't even find the word for what it is, but you're spoiling something so beautiful. You're ruining something. And it's there's just and it's an indicator of something deeply wrong culturally or in that individual. But I mean, the individual is a product of their culture. If we were in a sort of I'd be fascinated to know how tribal groups kind of dealt with that. I mean, obviously when it was, younger girls got married and things, then it was all part of the culture and that was fine. But if somebody was messing around with somebody younger, I don't know, but I guess again, if you're living in that reality of the moment, things are always changing. There aren't rules. I mean, there are some rules, but there's
I'm
also this
telling you, you don't want to
flexibility.
know. You don't want to know the answer.
Right.
I'm telling you straight up, you don't want to
Yeah,
know the
yeah,
answer
yeah. Okay.
because there are examples of behavior that are so off the charts
Yeah.
that we would like our brains would just explode. I mean, we'd just be like pop, like no, wait,
Well,
what?
I
They
think
said
we're
what?
getting little glimpses from Ammon, aren't we? Because
Yeah, but
he's
be
basically
careful.
just showing, these are little insights to that culture and that time. But obviously, everything you can imagine has been part of some culture at some point. So,
Yeah, it's true. And I have no idea whether Almond's bizarre um circus-like, phantasmagoria perspective, ah, if there's any evidence for what he says about like Jesus being a pirate who trafficked in children and stuff like this, if there's any evidence for that, I haven't seen it in anything that he said, right? He's
yeah.
saying things from the Septuagint, um, and the only thing he really seems to focus on is this one passage in Mark where
Mm.
Jesus is in a public park at 4 a.m. and there's a young boy there. Um, and maybe he reads the Greek so that um, the disciples, right, are teenagers. And look, uh, okay, hang on a second.
He's got this unhinged way of delivering it
He
that
does.
he doesn't clearly point to where what these, even when he's looking at the sources, he's not directly clearly translating, isn't he? He's not doing that. He's not giving that. That's what's kind of a bit mad about him is that he's making all these claims, but he's not actually clearly backing it up. But that's his style as well. And it's so fascinating because there's so much about him that just doesn't work for me at all. But I almost feel like it's not him for me. It's that energy. He's communicating that culture, and that's what fascinates me. And I can take all the kind of pollution in the signal because I feel like the energy is valuable, at least for now. It may just be a catalyst to kind of move towards something else for me personally. Because I can see he's also, he's very kind of culty. I can, imagine certainly for sort of younger people, they could really, he's quite charismatic. He's breaking the rules. He's being provocative. He's got this kind of slightly punk performance art style. His whole look, his little sort of almost bedsit living situation, all the little bits, the little details. I mean, it's art. I kind of enjoy it just for the art of it as well. You know, it's I've really, the sort of puerile nature of it kind of bothered me a bit, but I could tolerate that. But now he's going political. Ugh, he's really kind of spoiling it now. I wish he could kind of just move aside from that because he seems to have a
I
bit of a
mean,
woke
okay.
mind virus.
All right, so there's a bunch of things I want to say here. The first is, if I had a crack team of humans that we went on missions together, I want a couple teenagers in that team. I want maybe even a child in that team. I want the perspective of non-adults. I
Mm,
want it. Um, and I want them to have meaningful roles
mhm,
where they get the experience of their thought, concern, and perspective mattering to adults,
mm.
leading the adults,
Yeah.
right? I want them, we think we're trying to prepare them for life. In what way? What are we doing? They're not living. They're trying to escape the prison that we keep imposing on them. Okay, I guess there's some training in that, you know, but
Yeah.
what if they actually had meaningful roles where their perspectives um, and urgencies and motivations were not merely seen, but were nurtured in the way that leads to their development, right? And how crucial it is inside a team to have children, adults, and elderly people together,
Mm.
chasing something together, right?
Yeah.
This is the thing we don't do. We segregate the ages
Mm.
very severely.
Mm.
Whether it's intentional or not doesn't fucking matter because the
Yeah.
outcome is isolation and the crushing of human spirits.
Mm.
So I'm very much not ageist, right? I'm anti-ageist. And I mean, I'm not anti anything. I'm pro inclusion or something
Mm.
like this, right? In the sense of we need to give the different generations a context where they can integrate together and see with and for each other, and then use that seeing in meaningful, inactive context, right, where they're doing something together that's important to everyone in the group. Um,
Mm.
as far as Ammon goes, he's really weird because on the one hand, he's like, Jesus was a child trafficker, and on the other hand, he was like, those 12-year-old girls were the shit, they became the Medusae, and he's in love with one of them. Clearly, one of those, he doesn't say, I have a cheat, it's a dead woman. He says, I have a cheat, it's a dead girl who can resurrect the ancient, right? That's not a cheat. That's his lover. That's his companion in his soul. He sold his soul to that girl,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So he's got this really intense, weird, um, you know, bipolar thing where he absolutely despises pedophilia. It's clear he does. And he's constantly accusing the Christians of this. He's like, those Christians are just doing the children in the back room, right? And then on the other hand, he's subsumed and subservient to the concept of raising the young women over the men entirely, right?
Mm.
Which is demonstrated in some way in when he gets fired from the university because he gives the crop, right? He gives the crop to the young actress who he thinks is totally brilliant, and he has her beat him on stage with it because he wants her to know, he wants her to have that experience of what was really going on. So he knows the other actors can't receive that sort of physical punishment, so he accepts that. And then the guys in the audience, right, the administrators or whatever, they're just like, "You're done. It's over for you, bro. You're out of here."
Well, that and the sort of astral visitation.
Right. Which on the one hand he jokes about, in
Yeah.
one he's like, "Yeah, they said I was, hovering over the blah blah blah." And then in another podcast, he basically says, "Well, it's the woman, I think it's the girl I was doing the incubus ritual on, right? That
Yeah, and
has."
he talks about it now, doesn't he? Like he's getting comments from people and he's kind of like suggesting, yeah, I can come and visit. You know what I mean? It's
Oh my God, okay. I haven't
yeah,
seen
yeah.
that.
No,
Wow.
no, I heard there's not in those words, but it was like that basically,
Uh-huh.
he was playing with that edge a little bit as
Yeah,
he's
the thing is,
obviously got a following now and he's
he is a
probably getting
magician, and
propositioned.
he is a cult leader. Somebody contacted
Yeah,
me
yeah.
after yesterday, and they were like, I didn't quite know how to take the comment at first, but they were like, I was deeply involved in that cult. I was one of the mods on the Discord, and I just want you to know that like any kind of questioning or pushback or disagreement is not tolerated, right, at all. Um, I don't know what the history of that is. And look, Ammon is a phenomenon.
Hmm.
I mean, he's like a comic book hero, and a priest and a teenager in a
Yeah,
man's
yeah, yeah,
body,
yeah, yeah.
and
Mm,
right.
mm.
So there's, good luck in encompassing him. Um,
That
I
again,
have,
though, that again is to me, it's a sign of this cracking of everything. It's like all these edge characters now can start to sort of will appear and be broadcasting something that adds to the whole mix. And I feel like there's value, in my own exploration of trying to find signals in all the chaos that make some sense to me because I don't know about you, but I'm so frustrated with not being able to have conversations with people because they're so limited or things are off limits or they
mm,
just don't get it, as in they have a simplistic view of how things are. It's this or it's that, and so I'm always looking around the edges for anything that is bringing some truth or reality or seems to be plugged into what is rather than this world of ideas or this dead thing that you talk about that a lot of adults are dead and live in a dead culture. So I feel like, and I'm sort of just getting the sense that we're going to be seeing more Ammons appearing. And and maybe even we were talking, just saying it's time to start talking ourselves, I feel, because we have something of that, but maybe we're a little bit more grounded. We're not as entertaining or but I think we have something
we
valuable to
we
share.
we could be.
Well, yeah, well, maybe, but it's not, whatever it is, it's natural, right? You just being that thing. But I feel like I'm almost feeling like it's time for everyone who genuinely, who from a place of sincerity wants to kind of shed some light on what's going on without any kind of hidden, sort of um lost my word. Without not trying to manipulate or get something, or who just a genuine, care for humanity and the world. Just share what you've got, your perspective, your true perspective, your honesty. I feel like it's valuable now that we're having these conversations. The real conversations. I feel like everyone needs to be sharing the real conversations, not the propaganda or the opinion. I had this insight myself the other day that I don't have any opinions anymore because I've realized that as soon as I have an opinion, I've stopped paying attention to what's going on. I've died. That's death. That's like when you say I've got it, that's the moment of death. So I feel like, I have sort of patterns of how I'm experiencing the world, but like a river that has its patterns because of the way the rocks are or the way the flow is happening, it changes subtly. And sometimes a rock moves, or sometimes the water comes fast and shifts things around. And I feel like what were opinions, which were just like dead damming of the river, are now these kind of flexible patterns in the stream that could completely change in any moment or may last for a while, but they're always sort of adjusting and shifting to the current. They're not fixed. That's the thing. They're fluid, you know? Yeah.
Again, so much to unpack there. All right, so I'm going to say something about the opinions very briefly. I live for insight, so every day I'm trying to chase that. And part of why I make recordings is because I'm not having conversations with others who are chasing insight. So what I do is I imagine others who are chasing insight, and then I talk, I speak as though I am among them, right? Because I need that. I'll die inside without it. If I were actually with others, we would generate that together naturally, easily, for sure. I mean, I have a fire inside my mind and it's alive, but it needs a context in which to 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 both to both receive and to shine and transmit, right?
Mhm.
So without that context, I have to create it. And that's why I write, make music, sing, write poetry, have conversations like this. Yes, of course, we live in the age of what I call opinionaires, right? These are people who have, $1 million worth of opinions, right? They don't learn, they don't care. But there is a problem with knowledge. Again, back to the beginning of the conversation where I was questioning this, because the problem is machines, right? The problem is, I spoke about this recently in this was an insight I had a couple of weeks ago, where there's fundamental error where we transfer the expectation. This is my teacup, which is a mess because it's clear and you can see all the tea stains. And basically that's a lot like our minds, right? They get stained, but we can't see that we're starting to see with the stain instead of through the glass, right? And the stain is a historical thing that we're fucking attached to because of our egos and our vulnerability and our fear and whatever. But my point was, maybe this is a better example. When we transfer the expectation of physical continuity to cognitive constructs, concepts, ideas, equivalencies, analyses. And so the problem with this kind of stuff, with the transfer from the machine idea to cognition, is if you have a boat, which is a vehicle that you travel in, don't change your boat every day, right? The boat's not fluid. It's the same fucking boat every day, right? And there's some way in which that property gets transferred into ideation and conceptualization and evaluation and analysis and all of this. And that's what creates opinionaires. They cling.
I'll just throw something in though. The boat isn't the same boat every day. It's constantly being worn out. If you've ever had a boat,
Yes, but
and sometimes it gets damaged, or sometimes you just need to change something completely on it, you know?
yeah, but this thing has never changed.
Right.
Right. And this is what you use to grab things with in the mind and then hold them up and point out their features. to each other, right? This thing, right? The tweezing thing. It's the same fucking instrument every time, right? But this is artificial. This is not artificial, right? This is alive. And so there's a difference between the tool and the being, between, you know, what, the tweezer and the octopus of the mind. And we are not, most of us are not in contexts where the mind flexes and opens and explores and dreams and envisions and wonders. We're in contexts that are slave making and prisoneering primarily. So we have to, if we want to have something more than opinions, then we have to forge contexts together in which the vitality is primary, right? In that vital richness of learning and growing and developmental spirals, right? So that we get up register from where we start and then we keep going, right? It's the same with me. I have insights, I have biases, I have things, I have pet ideas that I think are amazing, but they keep changing. I keep discovering things. I want to just go back though to the thing about Ammon and politics briefly, because it's tied in with what you're saying about people need to speak. Actually, I'm missing the thing you said a little bit, but it was something like, you think it's time for people to, you know, one of the things Ammon was saying yesterday about what he calls free speech. Free speech isn't the capability to speak freely in the Greeks. Free speech is the necessity of speaking. What must be said, what must not be said. That's his idea of free speech. That's a very profound difference from how we see it. Because we see it as just like, oh, babble, you know, whatever, you say whatever you want. You get to say whatever you want to say. He's not saying that at all. He's saying something much more severe and radical, which is free speech is the obligation to say the unsaid things. Right? That's what he means by free speech. That's very radical and profound. You know, I wouldn't want Ammon as a politician. He's a dangerous person, in my view. Extremely dangerous.
Well, you know, it's funny, isn't it? His whole obsession with the tyrant, and you know, he's projecting that onto Trump. But guess where it is?
He even said,
Yeah.
he even said something like, I think I secretly want to be a policeman.
All right. Okay. Well, he's got that kind of kink, doesn't he? You know, definitely.
He does. Yeah,
Yeah. There's a
dom,
power, there's a power thing.
there's a strange sub-dom flipping
Definitely,
guy, right?
definitely.
Dom
Yeah.
sub thing, for sure. But yeah, he's such a trip. Anyway, what I was trying to say is one of the things he's saying, okay, so his view is that we're on the brink of apocalypse. I don't have too much trouble with that as an idea. It looks that way to me, feels that way to me. And what he's saying is that on the brink of apocalypse, humans become transformed, right? And they transform primarily, you know, he's very bipolar. So they transform primarily in two directions. Tyrants rise and become gods. And now that Trump has been bloodied, right, they talked about how this was both a liberation to pierce the ear specifically, or to pierce it with an awl up against a door, right, was a bond. And so now that he's been bloodied, he's like, he has been not just initiated, but like chosen, right? He's faced death. He's been cut. He's chosen. He's validated by the dark gods or whatever creates tyrants. And I mean, I understand features of this because I've been down this path. I mean, I had an experience where I was being nominated for a path like this, right? For a more than human path. And I rejected it because it just looked very fucking dangerous. And I didn't trust the motivations of the situation that was involved. So I recognize what he's talking about. But then the other thing is the liberators what did he call them? There's a word in Greek for the people who kill the tyrants. And so he sees like this bipolar thing where tyrants will rise, but from the polis also will rise tyrant killers, right? And there will be this conflict. And yeah, he's very focused on Trump. I can see why. He's seen these, he has seen the sequence of transitions before historically, and he recognizes that. And he's saying, like, you guys don't know because you haven't seen what happened over and over again. And this is what happens every 150 years, right? In major cultures, this is what happens. So, yes, he's very focused on that. And look, I'm not trying to sing Ammon's praises. I learn a lot from listening to him, though, and he's nuts. He's,
Yeah.
crazy.
He's
But I learned
he's a brilliant teacher.
he is a
This
fabulous
is,
teacher.
it's fascinating to me that he's doing so little actual direct teaching of Greek, and yet he's teaching Greek really powerfully because his whole delivery just inspires you to want to learn it. And
Yeah,
yet,
yeah,
disjointed, irrational, illogical way of communicating it, I think actually will work. I think
oh, it will.
if you
Oh,
were,
it
if
certainly
you were
will.
immersed in that for a year, you'd probably learn more Greek and become a better Greek scholar than if you did any other form of learning. I'm getting a real strong signal of that. Like he's an inspiring teacher because he loves it. I mean, his love of that language is so, I mean, that's what keeps me interested is when, all the other bits of him that might rub awkwardly against me. That bit where he's just purely like physically, sensually excited about the language. Like it's really physical and
Yeah,
sexual. He's
it is.
horny about Greek.
Yeah, yeah,
And
it totally
that's
is.
fucking amazing. It's
Yeah,
so that's what teachers, that's what you want in a teacher is someone who's so lit up by the subject that you just get pulled into it. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so first of all,
Hmm.
I don't think he's teaching Greek a little bit. He has classes like I think twice or three times a week that are just teaching Greek. And then he's also doing on what's that, Wise or Wisda or something, that place where you can book him for private lessons. He's
Okay.
also teaching there. But let's face it, when that guy's teaching Greek, he's not like a fucking professor.
Hmm.
It's like being taught Greek by a wizard.
Yeah.
Like poor boy the shark
Yeah,
saw,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
He's
Absolutely.
like
Yeah.
it's coming out of him like magma,
Yeah.
right? Like
Well,
there's
it's
I've
coming
never
from the
heard.
source. It's
Yeah,
coming from Greece from that
yeah,
time. Like we
yeah,
said
it is.
before, that's what he's actually opening the pipe. And here it
Yeah,
is. You want to learn Greek? Well, let's fucking go there.
yeah.
And here it is. That's what I feel from him is
He's also straight up saying two very radical things. They have the two substances, right? Kykeon and the theriac. Okay. And these are substances that are used in the rites, the mystery rites. And it's so funny that I understood where he was going almost the first time I heard him, and it completely blew my mind. Like it was like a shotgun to my brain. And what he was saying specifically is the women would kill you. They would administer a poison and you would become terrified and you would confess everything you'd ever done wrong because you know you're about to die
yeah.
and you want to get it off your chest. And they used a similar drug to interrogate people. It would terrify them so badly that their whole body would just start vibrating and they would just emit every bad thing they'd ever done, right? And then so they would kill you or they'd bring you right to the brink of death so that essentially you have like a near death experience, right? And you're up above the human for the first time, fully aware. And then they would resurrect you, right? And then you would be free of the fear of death, which meant you could not be enslaved, right? No, there's no threat after that that can terrify you. You know not necessarily that you have eternal life, which is the weird Christian idea. It's this other thing. It's that this life is a subposition of freedom that's essentially absolute and inviolate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so now you can't be fucking compromised,
Yeah.
right? You have actual freedom. And this is one of the weird implications of Ammon's insanity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so where am I going with this? Oh yeah, okay, so what he's actually saying is, it'd be great if we could have the rites and the kykeon and the theriac and stuff, but you don't need it because the Greek language itself will do this for you, right? I will give you aeonic life. He's essentially saying that he is the door. He's a Jesus. He's a Jesus. He's the aeonic Jesus, right? I am the way. I am the door. Follow me. I will give you aeonic life through the Greek language in which it is encrypted, it is encoded, and I will put the spirit of it into you, and you will be liberated from the fear of death and from slavery and from lying, right? From the lying bullshit of the cultures that we live in, that tell you things about divinity that can't be true. Go ahead.
Well, that I feel like that's the tyrant, that's the self-deception, the where he thinks that he can do that because you have to go through the process. And for
Mm.
everyone, it's different. And what's super exciting for me is that this idea has re-emerged now when we're also seeing this kind of psychedelic renaissance happening or this upswelling of interest in that. It's exactly what culturally we need. We need to have those rights again where people die to themselves and to this life and go into the underworld and get resurrected so they can actually become human beings. So they have a chance to become an elder so that the culture has a chance to have that perspective that puts it into the greater picture, into the mystery, that roots it in the mystery and thinks in terms of the future and the past. It's that maturity that's missing in our culture. We don't have the rites of passage that create elders. And that's what was going on back then. I think that's why that culture was so profound because it was built into the culture. It was so advanced. You were taken beyond everything you knew. You were killed. You were actually killed. And you went on some kind of, you did go on an underworld journey. It was a literal thing and you were dead and then you got brought back to life. th- that's profound. And then you have a culture that's built on that, where all of the important people, I mean, I don't know how far it went. I don't know whether there was a class thing to it and some people weren't allowed to go through that or what. But, maybe, we're talking about Greece, maybe that kind of ancient Greek peak of that culture is when it all came together in a beautiful way, but its origins were before then. Tribally, people were doing something like that for sure. All of that, these cult traditions he's talking about, they came from small groups of people doing that stuff. It all percolated up into this moment where it came together and created this culture that our entire civilization is built on. And,
I mean, our civilization is a catastrophic counterfeit of it.
well,
Um,
it is, but its foundation was that, and then something when, this is the next thing is like, what happened with that whole Christian thing? Because that's where it seemed to have taken a wrong turn, or we kind of denied ourselves, we suppressed this origin story. The other day, I was thinking, wow, it's so fascinating that the whole horror show of the Catholic Church and the paedophilia and all of that abuse, it's as if because the origins of Christianity had that integrated into it, and then they tried to suppress it and push it down. and control it and deny it, it's come up again in this perverse way, almost like in an individual person. If you push down and suppress those base urges or your kind of very origins, eventually they come up in an unhealthy way. Just felt like it was so poetic in a way that I understood now a bit more about why that's happened. And I even started thinking bishops wearing purple, it's so fucking interesting, right? There's so many correlations.
No, I mean,
Fascinating.
the purple, you could throw almond out the window and just go at the history of purpleness, and you're gonna discover like explosions of, I mean, by the way, like there's, wait, I can't point
It's
properly.
my favorite color. I've had a
This thing
relationship
here,
with
right?
purple my whole life. It's
Yeah,
fascinating.
mine too. Yeah, purple and magenta and stuff, right? Like, yeah. No, yeah, you could just go with the history of purple. You wouldn't need almond. There's so much there. Like, obviously, the Greek language and the culture comes from somewhere. Um, Hillman is a staunch opponent of the concept of Proto-Indo-European. He thinks that's complete, just made up bullshit, academic lies. It's never, not a thing. But he talks about something that he refers to as the Pelasgian or Pelasgian period, which is sort of where the origins of some of this stuff arise, apparently. But I'm very curious about what the hell is meant by the gods. And clearly, there's a catastrophic problem with the rise of monotheism. Some kind of a developmental uh, like warp or fold in group human cognition. You know, it's weird, the idea of a chieftain or a queen or a prince or a king or a ruler, which is hilarious because it means to measure, right? The measure, the one who measures adeptly and correctly and so forth. And obviously they're nominated and validated by the gods themselves. So you can trust their measuring because the gods have validated them and this kind of thing. The strange crook and flail that the pharaohs hold, right? These are devices of measurement and of um, both knowledge and purgation, right? Because the flail is actually the device that you use to separate the chaff from the chaff from the grain, and the crook is the device that you use to catch sheep,
Yeah.
right? So this is the
Control.
unit.
It's husbandry. It's
Yeah, but it's the unity of the two. It's the Cain and Abel unification right there, right? I am Cain and Abel in one, so to speak, from Genesis, wherever the hell that story comes from, because it certainly does not come from the Jews.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, there's so much there. Like, who are the gods? What are the gods? I mean, in my own life, I have some experience of a divine intelligence that is unlike anything I ever imagined possible. But if someone says, well, what do you think that was? I'd be very careful about saying anything, to be honest. But I
Yeah.
can understand at least the idea that it is plausible, and perhaps even likely, that our distant ancestors were cognitive and cognitively, emotionally, and reproductively symbiotic with non-advanced, complex, non-human intelligences that dwell in the substrate of time-space itself. They are hyper-distributed over, they're aeonic, they are outside of time, right? And
Mhm.
that humans may have been, we may have been the bees to their flowers. And our civilizations were the fucking honeycomb of that relationship. And then the flowers disappeared. And now we're just down here going like, what the fuck am I buzzing around for? Like what am I doing here? Right. I mean, you can imagine, I don't know, remoras without sharks or fish without water, right? birds without air, or whatever. Like, this is the problem that I think we're actually facing. Our species was born for a completely different thing that we've never fucking tasted, and we have millions of stories about it. And we're born with the memory and expectation of it, and then it doesn't fucking happen, and we freak out. We don't know what the fuck to do, right?
So there's two parts there for me. One is the psychedelic experience and this meeting of entities and archetypes. I mean, maybe the two are interchangeable. I don't know. There's these archetypal aspects that we, unconsciously are all connected to, and maybe actually consciously, if you're in that kind of cult ritual and you've taken the right drugs, then you can go meet and see the gods in that sense. So though there's those kind of possibilities in that sense of where the gods are. But I also think when people were a lot more embodied, animal-like in connection with nature, they were sensing and meeting spirit in its different forms in nature. And the gods were also in nature. They were perhaps in other living things, or they maybe not just live in the psychedelic realm or that dimension, but I feel like there's another dimension that's deep in nature. And if you really like an animal in nature, you're seeing and connecting with the entities that are in nature. Those energies are there. So those kind of almost like heaven and earth places where the gods might be. But then there's also the monotheistic thing, I think, comes from the sense of oneness or the one consciousness that we can also all experience at times or have access to. And I feel like it should be all of those things. There is this one consciousness, I feel, that we share, and there are these gods. And I don't know what the relationship between the two is, whether the one consciousness is just one consciousness between humans, or whether, which it feels more instinctively and experientially to me, the one consciousness is shared with all living things on earth and material, this kind of material realm. But maybe there's this other realm that's outside of that where the gods live. So there's these kind of, do you see, does any of that kind of make sense? I feel like it's all of those things are real, and we started choosing one over the other, rejecting the physical, the kind of the number of gods, the kind of whole cluster of them for the one thing. And the one thing wasn't the kind of shared consciousness. It was perceived as something almost outside of us or something, or not that over time it became that, because I think initially the Christians or the monotheistic religions in their early days were just accessing oneness together and calling it God. They weren't separating it and adding all those things kind of crept in like a sort of pollution. And then we started getting disembodied, and then it became, we just went off on a weird tangent. So anyway, lots there.
All right. So
Hmm.
first of all, from what I've learned of traditional Blackfoot knowledge through my friend Ryan Firstiver, who's a beaver man in Blackfoot traditional spiritual, situation. They don't have any gods. There's no God. Everything that is holy or powerful is natural. It's the sun, it's the moon, it's the mountain, it's the beaver, it's the bison, it's the little plant, it's the little stone. It has to do with the sky and the earth and how they relate, right? So there's no such thing as like a god or a demon or anything. There are what you could call negative influences, but there are in English, who knows what the hell the Blackfoot it would say, because in Blackfoot language, the whole idea of identity is nothing like what it is in English. Like, you should get a taste of what identity is in a language that's, say, 15,000 years old, right? Because, Ammon's going like, man, that stuff 5,000 years ago, you got to get a taste of that, dude. It'll free your mind, right? But you should get a taste of something 15 or 20,000 years old. You want to free your mind? See what they were doing back when they realized that language was dangerous. And if you believed what language told you about identity, you were going to get in a lot of trouble, right? They knew better than that. They knew that they would constantly go against the language. Like the idea of an enemy, you should hear the story that they have about what this idea of an enemy, how confused it is, right? How dangerous it is. Because what happens is, very briefly, two enemies meet in a cave and they can't tell that they're enemies yet, and they're blind. They can't see. It's a storm outside. So they sort of touch each other and slowly figure out, like, oh my God, that's the guy. I left my village to kill one of these guys. And he's the guy who left his village to kill one of my guys, right? And we're meeting in this cave. They form this plot. When they go back to their respective villages that are supposed to have a battle, they don't have the idea of war. No such idea as war. They're supposed to have a battle, and they tell the people, they give each other a lock of their hair, right? And they tell the people, oh, I killed one of them, right? I buried him over here. Like, come with me, show you where I buried him. They're like, you didn't kill him. Where's the rest of his scalp? Blah, blah, blah. This is where scalps actually come from in Blackfoot. It's just one story. So they bring both of them together, bring the peoples that are supposed to have the battle together in this place in the springtime. And the two warrior guys, the men that met in the cave, exchange families. So this guy gives him his family, and this guy gives him his family. And then the people live together in the spring in this place, and the children are ecstatically happy. All the teenagers and the children are just out of there, and the elders, they're all out of their mind with joy. They have all this thing, and then accidentally during a game at the end of the season, when they have to go back to their respective places, a teenager is killed in the game accidentally, and enmity rises again as they go back apart. Okay, so there's that. Now, then there's this other thing, okay? The problem in the monotheism, which if you look specifically at Gnostic traditions, right, they will point out that these single gods are not trustworthy. Yahweh wants you slaughtering people, like kill the animals, kill the children, kill everything, lay waste to that, burn it down, destroy those people. And what you start to see here is a kind of like a schizophrenic, a complex schizophrenic otherizing, right? That has no kind of moral or ethical or relational intelligence whatsoever. It's straight up fucking immune system shit. It's just kill the others, kill them, kill their children in their beds, kill their mother, kill the grandmothers, kill the animals, burn their fields, tear those forests down, rip the temples out, kill. Right? And so what kind of a god is that? Like, how does that even arise? And in this, you get into like the Julian Jaynes arc of the origins of consciousness and the breakdown of the bicameral mind, where there was this kind of this transition in human cognition that occurred over about the past 2,500 years, where effectively we confused an aspect of our weird cognitive conceptual development with the gods, right? And so now we're obeying features of cognition. People are hearing voices tell them things and so forth. I mean, not that voice hearing is only insane, but it is a very peculiar feature of human potential. Have you ever heard a voice?
Well, I think all the time, don't we all?
No, that's not what I mean.
Okay.
No, I
But
mean,
a voice that clearly feels like it's something else, not you. Right.
that's the first part of what I mean. And the second part of what I mean is it is the voice of a thundering thing. It's not like me saying words.
Okay.
Okay? If I were to emulate it, it would be terrifying. I could emulate it. I would look like a mad psychotic person if I tried to emulate it. But like I remember the first time that this happened to me, it was late in the night. The voice came from the upper left corner of the room. This is important. And it basically just said like, I am here, but in thunder language, right? Like nothing I've ever encountered before. And the only other time I heard a voice, there's, okay, so voice hearing has like a bioelectrical component.
Hmm.
The body starts to change. You start to enter into a liminal state that could be hypnopompic or hypnagogic, right? And so you're in this vibratory state. And both times when this happened, what would happen is there would be a catastrophic dip in my biophysical energy. It was like the opposite of a pulse, right? And then from the bottom of that dip, then the voice would emerge and I would hear it.
Or like a
Uh,
pressure drop, like
yes,
everything was sucked out and
yeah,
then came in.
boom, right?
Right,
So
right, right.
it's important to, of course, I understood what you meant by all the time. I knew what you
Sure.
meant, but
Yeah, yeah. No, no. This
I
is
meant the
that
different
makes it
thing.
clear.
So the
Different.
other time it was a similar thing. There was a sudden dip in the bio, I don't know what to call it, in my energetic coherence.
Hmm.
And the voice that happened then, I realized like, oh my God, the people who suffer from this must really be suffering because I've heard many people speak about it. And I've had close friends who hear voices. It was like an old drunken Southern guy. And he was like, you're a fucking piece of shit, you fucking maggot piece of shit. Just like absolute hatred, insulting, denigration. And I was just like, oh my God, because I've heard that people hear critical voices and stuff, but until you've had the experience of it directly, and I realized like, oh my God, what would happen in my life if that became a constant experience? These experiences are relative to the rise of monotheism, right? The voice hearing thing was a thing, right? And it's still a thing in some cohorts of people under certain conditions, right? Um, those are the only two times I've heard voices,
Mm.
right? So they're very specific one-time situations. Oh, no, wait, there was a time when I was a child. There was a time when I was a little boy. But yeah, that monotheism stuff, it's important, I think, to entertain many perspectives on it, not one or two. We can entertain a sort of a pro-biblical or pro-Islamic or pro-Hindu perspective on monotheism. And we can also entertain the Gnostic perspectives of the demiurge and the bad gods that took over whole peoples, and then just set them warring with other peoples. But there really is this thing that's sort of like a distorted feature of the immune system, right? Where it's just like violent, straight up violent. And you can see the justifications for war and things that come out of this and are really, really toxic. I mean, unless I'm very confused, and I could well be, and my entire life history of despising war is just confused because I don't understand. Like Arjuna, um, with Krishna on the battlefield, or whoever Arjuna is with, is it Brahman or Krishna? And Arjuna is saying, "I can't kill my family, my brother," and he's like, "You don't understand. It's already done. You have to do this, right? Maybe I just don't understand. Maybe war is actually somehow like a heart, like the you know diastolis of the heartbeat or something, right? Of the humans. I don't know. I'm not enlightened. I'm just a feeling human being.
Hmm. Yeah, a question for your perspective in relation to what you just said. So this hearing thing, do you think there's an equivalent that's visual and an equivalent that's felt? You know how we all have different people are wired in different ways. Some people are, you know that, yeah. So I wonder, do you think there was it happening in all those realms? Were people like seeing somebody? Were people feeling somebody as well as hearing, or this external thing? Or and
Sure.
have you had experiences in those other realms apart from
Okay,
hearing?
so first of all, I'd have to hear from people, and I'd have to see records of people who made this claim. Surely there are visual hallucinations that have felt components. And what was happening to me was not merely auditory, there were psycho-emotional components. Also, I should mention, this is perhaps highly problematical because I've spoken of it now here today, but I should mention that a couple of the people I told that story to started hearing voices. That voice after, over and over again, like not once or twice. Um, one of them was very angry with me. They were like, "You gave me this thing, and now it's in my mind, and I can't get it out." You know? And that person wasn't emotionally or mentally unstable. There's something contagious about that specific thing. Unfortunately, it wasn't my intent to.
Yeah, yeah. So it wasn't, I was going to say, so was there anything particular that you remember about when you were communicating it in that instance that sort of made it stand out, or was it just like it was now?
Look, it was night. I was with my girlfriend. She was asleep, and I had this first experience. And I woke her up and told her what was happening. She was immediately furious with me, absolutely furious. Why? Why are you telling? Now it's going to be like this forever. Like, why did you do this? You know, why did you tell me? Right? And then my ex-girlfriend, I told at the same time, and she turned totally white. She just turned white as a ghost and said, "I heard it in my own mind on the day you said it. The next day, I heard the same thing." And other people I have told it to have said strange that things that don't make sense. Okay, they don't rationally make sense. Yeah, there probably are other modalities, but voice hearing is a particular vectored thing in my mind. Um, and it's common among certain kinds of drug users, people who are experiencing psychosis, schizophrenia. Not that we know what psychosis is a broad range
Yeah.
of things. Schizophrenia is a broad range of things, it's not one thing. Some of that stuff's positive or pronoic. Not all of it is, only madness. So it's a very complex mess, that, I think.
Hmm.
I don't know exactly what to make of it. Julian Jaynes seemed to think that there were an array of faculties that degraded or transformed over time in vast human cohorts. And much of what he has to say in that book is some of the most brilliant things I've ever heard a human being say. He's wrong. He's openly wrong about some stuff, but that book is nuts, and I've read it, 10 or 12 times. It was directly pointed out to me again when the intelligence that wasn't human was with me. It was like that book there, this book over here. I mean, the two primary books that were pointed out were that one and Korzybski's Science and Sanity. But these are books from my own intellectual history. So yeah, what are minds? The hell are minds?
Hmm.
What they usually are, I think, is it's like having one piece of a bird, right? It's like you live your whole life and you've got like one lung sac of a bird, and you're like trying to keep that thing going, but it doesn't, you don't know what it's for. Right? You don't know that it's part of a bird. You don't know that the bird's part of the forest and the insects and the sky and all those things. You just have this thing that you're trying to just keep it going, right? You're just trying to keep it doing its thing.
So when we were living closer to the natural world in small groups, were we living in the full bird at that point, do you think?
Much closer.
Hmm.
The idea of individual humans is one of the dumbest ideas in the history of the planet.
Agree.
It would be, I mean, I don't want to create images of violence in people's minds, but imagine if when your child was born, you snipped off their fingers, put them in a box, and then gave them that box. That's what happens to our humanity. Okay. And no one would ever do anything that stupid, but we do it with things that are more precious than fingers. Right. And we're completely unaware that we're amputating the vast force of faculties that are natural to our humanity. And then we're pinning those to a fucking board like they do with insects in museums, right? You see these boards of the
Yeah,
insects,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
right? And they're like incredibly beautiful dead shells of nothing in there, right? And there's millions of them. And as we do that more and more, those beings disappear from the natural world. But we have the museum display, come see it with your children.
Yeah, we've got the DNA. It's all fine. I
The actual fuck are we doing? What are we
know.
doing?
Wow,
This
that's
is the opposite of everything possibly beautiful or true.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that sort of summarizes for me the whole digital experiment and this
I mean,
idea,
it's literally what I said. These are
this
called
mania
digits.
for the whole kind of technological metaverse or whatever they're calling it. It's just fucking insane. The world is so rich and beautiful, and anything that takes us away from that is just insanity for me. And I'm wondering if this energy, this archaic energy, is gonna pull us back from the brink of that. Because that to me, that's death. That's worse than death. I mean, it's not death, it's just if there is a thing that's more dead than death, that vision of us uploading ourselves into machines is like a
Very
more
important.
dead than dead thing.
Very important what you said there. More dead than death. That's what the human, that's what the extended human cohort is after. And it's because they're captured by processes that are fundamentally dead inside and that feed on the death of meaning, identity, relation, history, nature, the sky, all these things. I just have to show this image because it's so fucking perfect, right? This is McGilchrist's book on, it's the fragmented, right? It's this thing thinks it's God, but it's a token in a mirror, right? It's the loss of it. It's the absence of everything having been condensed into a point of like a weapon that penetrates and cuts, and it cuts little distinct identities, right? It's so funny when you said the digital world because I had just talked about snipping off the fingers and putting them in a box, and these are actually called digits. This is where we get the word, this is where
No,
we
yeah,
get the idea, right? But this is alive. This is the most important. This is the whole origin of the trouble and the gift.
yeah.
This thing.
The
This
hand.
one
We
thing.
talked about this before, and it's
Yes,
interesting that that image has the
yes.
opposing
It
thought.
does. It does. It's pinching.
Yeah, that it's all in there, isn't it? Interesting.
And also this is this, right? This is a broken piece of this thing, which is a device that allows a specific mode of disembodied reflection, right? The mirror is the absence of the engaged other mind, other spirit, other lineage of the family, of the history, right? That person before you, the mirror is the weird absence of an actual being. And yet it is that absence that allows you to see your visage. There's so much crazy, amazing things we can learn together if we just take the time to understand the predicament that we're in and where it originated from and what that teaches us about what we can do instead. And that's really the thing that I'm most on fire about.
Yeah, I wonder if that the first time, the first thought was looking at a reflection in the water or something. You know, that kind of where there was this abstraction where you saw the world reflected. Because that's like the opening to mind or something, or that kind of thinking mind anyway.
There's so many important things to understand about the idea of reflection, but also weirdly, the best analog for consciousness is water. There's no other. It's water. It flows. You can shape the flow. That's why that voice echoed in the minds of other people. It shaped the flow. And once it shaped the flow, it developed an iterative echo, right? And hypnosis relies on this. And so does trance, and so does dreaming. All of these things, they are related to each other, and they have to do with transforming the rhythm of the flow of consciousness. And when the humans get together and they make a circle and they start bouncing up and down and they hit the drum or they ululate, ululate, right? They're modulating the flow of consciousness together, and they're creating what they're creating is something, it's the if we were listening to the occult explorers, which I was listening to yesterday, they were like, that drum, that tympanum, that's Athena's hymen that you're vibrating. You're making it vibrate, right? And it's intact and it rings and it changes the chorus, right? And all these things. It's really amazing. It never occurred to me that the analogy between the drum skin and the hymen and the tympanum in the ear and the barrier between the outside and the in and the
Yeah.
sacred gatekeeping of that, right? All of these things. This is why I listen to those crazy people. It's for insights like that.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Hmm. I feel like we should pause. And maybe I'd like us to explore, perhaps next time we get together, I want to explore this
I'm
and
all in.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm all into exploring this.
yeah.
This is the key to memory and liberation, because this is the thing that has trapped us, right? What is the picture behind you on the chimney?
I'll grab it. So this was something that my gran had. She spent a bit of time when she was first married, just after the Second World War finished. My grandpa used to work for BP and he was out in the Middle East. He was an engineer and they lived in Iran and Iraq. And this is something she picked up out there that I've kind of inherited, I suppose.
It's
Yeah, I
very
don't know who
profound.
it's by or what the story is. It probably refers to something well known that's just outside of my knowledge. But yeah.
The color scheme is familiar to me from a metaphysical perspective I was shown when the other intelligence was with me.
Right.
The red and the blue. Absolutely fundamental. Everything that exists understands this conversation between red and blue. The stars, when we look at them in the sky, if they're approaching the earth, they shift toward blue. If they're departing, they shift toward red, right? It's fundamental to being. Even beings without eyes understand red and blue. Coming and going.
Well, they're the bookends, aren't they, of the visible light spectrum?
Right. Important. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, and of course the feminine is red birthing blue, right? And the masculine could be seen as the opposite. I have to think more carefully about that.
Well, you need both, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to show if I can pull this off. Let me see if I can do this. And then we can, we can wrap up. I've had this on my wall for many years. More than 20 probably. And it's a painting by some well-known artist, or it's an assemblage, but it's relevant. You see like the red, it's all red and blue. There's nothing but red and blue. And this is like the Holy Virginal Mother over here,
Mother and
right?
child. Is that
And
I can't quite, is that a
yeah, she's
little person
pregnant.
inside? Yeah.
Yeah, she's pregnant.
I love
It's very
I love
trippy.
the expression on his face and the empty thought bubble.
Yeah, this is just one of the most primordial images I've ever seen. I've had it on my wall forever. A friend of mine, a brilliant poet named Jeff Conant, gave it to me. Um, he's long been a crusader for indigenous rights and nature.
It somehow, for me, sums up the insanity of the nuclear family as well. It just kind of it encapsulates that in some way too.
Yeah, that is some crazy, weird, modern nut house. I mean, not incomprehensible, but loopy as hell. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for that journey. That was interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Tim.
Mm. Glad we
So
finally got
appreciate
round to do it again.
Yeah, so appreciate your mind and spirit and the warmth of your heart and your deep embodied the richness that you bring from the garden and the land into the speaking.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to, thank you. I'm looking forward to just the creative act of this for me with you, because you have this incredible mind, your UFO. And nice to ride on it. But yeah, I just feel like there's this potential. For me, it's like we're talking about the language, this kind of extra dimension in the Greek. I feel like conversation has an extra dimension when it isn't just two talking heads giving their opinions. It's a creative act, and I feel like that's kind of what I was saying, that I'm feeling this compulsion and I'm seeking out people conversing who are creating, who are in that act, not just, speaking from their comfortable place, but exploring. Yeah.
Yeah, trying to see,
Yeah.
trying to see.
Yeah.
Not, yes, of course I can.
Knowing, but trying to
Yeah,
see. Yeah.
Yeah, I can read from the book of Darin, and I do a little bit of that, and it's not terrible, but yeah, I want to see better. Every time I go to look, it's like going to a living place or something, or meeting a frog, or I want to see better
Mm.
together whenever we can, and I'm so grateful. If my mind's a UFO, then you're the pilot. Like we go together to see better. I trust and believe in that process.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll pause it here, but let's say goodbye